Hello there, it's Saturday, August 31st, 2019. I'm 13 News Now meteorologist Rochelle Pute. We're tracking major Hurricane Dorian, a Category 4 as of the 8 a.m. advisory on August 31st, and also a couple more developments as we're heading out of August and into September, which is climatologically the most active month, and we start to see more of maybe those named systems. So here's that 8 a.m. update on Hurricane Dorian, Category 4 storm, very well developed eye that developed yesterday, pretty much been holding true as we moved overnight and into today's update. 445 miles east of West Palm Beach, Florida. Again, those winds 145 miles per hour, now moving due west at 12 miles per hour, and that pressure now down to 944 millibars. As we see the pressure dropping, we see the storm strengthening, and that's what we had between the 5 a.m. update and the 8 a.m. update. Went from 140 to 145 mile per hour winds as that pressure dropped off. So let's talk about the quadrants. We typically split up hurricanes into 4 quadrants, but which of them typically sees more of those issues and those impacts? That's going to be the right front quadrant. So if the storm is moving to the north, that right front quadrant is going to have the maximum impact, and that's when we're talking about some of maybe the heaviest rain, the storm surge, because hurricanes, they rotate counterclockwise. So we're seeing those winds pushing that water up into the coastline and into areas where it typically isn't. So anywhere in the right front quadrant, we'll see some of those maximum impacts. The right left quadrant, still significant storm surge. Just because the right front sees some of those maximum impacts doesn't mean that the other areas do not, or they're weaker or maybe better to be in within that storm. Back right quadrant still sees significant wind, and typically the back left is the quote weakest, but it's still very dangerous anywhere in this hurricane. Even those outside of that front right quadrant can see significant impacts. Now Dorian is moving to the west, so areas in that front right quadrant are some of those areas that we have the hurricane warnings in place for the Bahamas. So we're going to start to see some of those impacts maybe later on tonight, certainly into the morning tomorrow, and maybe for a full 24 hours into Monday morning as well. We also have a hurricane watch for some areas of that nation as well. So I do want to compare the models. GFS is in the yellow, that's the American model. Then we also have the European, which is in the red. There are a couple of differences in the two as we move through this forecast period. So we're starting off this morning 8 a.m. As we move through and head into tomorrow, we start to see a little bit of a split. The GFS has a little bit more tightly packed, so a little bit more strength. And also we're watching the GFS shift a little bit farther north. But it does look like mainly the center of both of those models keeps Dorian either flirting with the southeastern coastline or even potentially off or slightly inland. Neither one of these brings it well inland into Georgia, South Carolina, or even really Florida for that matter. But that doesn't mean that we can't see landfall of the eye of Dorian coming inland, but we also do have to watch for the potential of it staying off the coast. But that would actually be somewhat of relief because that right front quadrant would be more so into the open waters. But then we also have to watch for the warm open waters that Dorian is moving over. Possibly if there's some weakening, then some re-strengthening as well. We'll also have to watch for a very hard to forecast potential eye wall replacement cycle as well. So here's the latest forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. 8 a.m. 145 mile per hour sustained winds, and those gusts are up to 165, moving at 12 miles per hour off to the due west, 445 miles east of West Palm Beach, and less than 300 miles off of the northwestern Bahamas. Again, Bahamas hurricane warning in effect as it moves to the west. Still a Category 4 storm by 2 a.m. on Sunday. Forecast to still have those sustained winds of 145 miles per hour. Doesn't lose much steam in the forecast between Sunday and Monday. Still 140 miles per hour, sitting on top potentially of some of those Bahamian islands, even those in the hurricane watch. The storm is about a few hundred miles across. If we don't see that direct impact to some of those islands, some areas could still be dealing with some very strong winds, storm surge, flooding rains. National Hurricane Center is talking about rains in the Bahamas anywhere between 10 and 15 inches, possibly up to 20 plus inches. So we'll have to see exactly how that sets up. And then once we go past the Bahamas with Hurricane Dorian, but we don't want to forget about neighbors in the Bahamas and the potential impacts of this storm with them, we start to look toward Florida and also the southeastern coast of the United States. Take a look at this hook that Dorian is forecast to follow. We just saw the GFS and the Euro, even though the GFS was a little bit faster and getting it up the coastline. Both of them had the hook as well. And we're looking at the center of this cone. We typically don't pay too much attention and put too much stock into the center of this cone, but a lot of that is off of the coastline, and Dorian still in those warm waters off the Florida coastline. So we could still be talking about a major hurricane into the middle of next week. This forecast 2 a.m. on Wednesday, 125 miles per hour. But if Dorian moves a little bit farther off to the west and inland, we could see maybe a little bit more weakening. But then if it goes over the waters again, water's still so warm this time of year, we could see some strengthening, potentially a Category 2 storm, though, as we move into Thursday and the end of next week, we're still dealing with a hurricane and still forecasting a hurricane as well. So here's what Dorian looks like on that tropical satellite. I do want to show you this infrared imagery. Anywhere we see those kind of light whites and grays, that's extremely cold cloud tops, and we're seeing those thunderstorms being very well developed around that eye. Again, that has been well developed since Friday, so that really hasn't fallen apart. Haven't seen too much of an eye wall replacement cycle happening yet, but that's not to say that it will not. So Category 4. Hurricane Dorian down toward the bottom of your screen. We have high pressure out in the ocean, and then another high pressure sitting over the mainland United States. These two are going to steer Dorian, and that's where we're seeing kind of that hooking pattern coming from. So it's moving off to the west, going to step over here, and then we have, remember, that clockwise flow around high pressure. So moving off to the west and then curving it back around the southeast coast. Whether or not it makes landfall in Florida, maybe Georgia, South Carolina, still to be determined. We have to keep a very close eye on Dorian, because if it stays over the waters, we have that potential of it staying very strong. So Dorian in the future, what are we talking about? Fluctuations in strength are likely, especially depending on if it moves inland or not. Turn to the north is likely near Florida, and we're unsure if the turn is going to be offshore, inland, or right on that coastline. So what's the bottom line, everybody? Hurricane alerts are in effect, so those updates are going to be coming out from the National Hurricane Center every 3 hours. No alerts as of this 8 a.m. update to the lower 48 because landfall is uncertain, but Georgia, South Carolina, and the southern edge of North Carolina are included in that cone of uncertainty. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're heading out of August, heading into September. So September is when we climatologically see about 34% of the named storms, and also peak hurricane season. That peak date, September 10th. So we're about 10, 11 days away from that as we are watching this update and recording this update as well. So I do want to talk about a couple of other areas that are now starting to develop in the tropical Atlantic. Off of the Cape Verde Islands, we're seeing this area of some showers and storms developing here. 10% chance within the next 2 days, within a medium 50% chance within the next 5 days. And then back toward the Gulf of Mexico, toward the Yucatan Peninsula, we have a cluster of storms in the Gulf. 10% chance within the next 2 days and a 20% chance within the next 5 days. So we're going to keep an eye on those as well. So your 2019 Atlantic hurricane names, we've had Aaron that has fallen apart. The next name will be Ferdinand, and then Gabrielle are the next two names in the lineup here for the 2019 hurricane names. Now, I'm not saying these next two storms are going to be Fernand and Gabrielle, but again, we're going to have to keep a close eye on it as we're watching Dorian, as that storm passes over the Bahamas and does that hook to see where it does make landfall in the southeastern United States, if at all, because that's also a possibility. But even if it doesn't make landfall, we could see impacts outside of that eye wall with the storm surge, the tropical rainfall, that strong winds. So make sure you're connecting with me on social media and posting updates throughout the weekend. I'll be back tomorrow evening to record an update, but you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Rochelle Pearton, then also on Instagram at Rochelle TV.